have a right to be here. This is the public. All right. Okay. You got this, everybody. Don't touch my people. Come on, everybody. Yeah, everyone in. Everybody who is the public who wants to be in. Don't touch me. If you're not gonna, no, ma'am, please.
So Jasper, how did you originally get involved with the Sunrise Movement?
I've been following the Sunrise Movement since they started. I saw that there was going to be a pretty big climate protest happening here at the DNC this weekend. And so I thought, what better way to get involved when, you have the Democratic Party coming to your city.
So now on the first day, I noticed when they were checking people in the morning, right? This event's supposed to be open to the public.
Yes.
So I noticed that they weren't giving out lanyards, that the only people they were admitting were DNC members and members of the press.
Right.
So now I think you were one of the folks that didn't get a lanyard to come inside.
I did.
But not initially, right? You had to...
No.
Walk me through that
Oh,
part.
sure.
Okay.
So the Resolutions Committee was set to be at 8 a.m.
Right.
They expected activists not to know how to get up early, apparently. So we got there early. I got here about 7:25. I was given a guest pass. I signed up with the DNC the day before, so they knew that I was going to be here. So I went into the room that we were going to have the committee meeting in, and it was very, very empty. There was over half the chairs were empty. There were a couple Sunrise people who were there, and I start getting texts from my people saying, we can't get in. They say that there's no more room. They're at capacity. So I thought that was bullshit, and obviously an attempt to squish democracy and to keep activists from seeing the process, which we knew was going to be, difficult to get the resolutions passed that we wanted to get passed. So I went all the way back out to the table that I had gotten my badge. There were about 100 or 150 activists who were there, angry, and this is 7:35 at this point, so well before the meeting is going to start. They said they didn't have enough passes. They, more people came than they were expecting. So we start shouting. We start saying things like, we're all registered. We already got registered. And then they pulled out some, head of something to try to pacify us. And she was like, we just don't have enough space. And so I start shouting, I've just been in the room. There's plenty of chairs. Hundreds of people can fit in there. What you're doing is undemocratic. This meeting should be open to the public. And so it became clear they were not going to give us the passes. So then we looked around and I said, okay, guys, well, they can't stop us all. Let's go. So we start marching down these hallways. We came around this corner. I was leading the way because I had been to the room before. So when we got to the doors to go in, there are, maybe 4 or 5 double doors, and they had blocked them all off. Right. So I start talking to the people that were inside, the security people, and they wouldn't let us in. The whole group came behind us, and there was a struggle. I was let in because of my badge, and immediately I flew, flung the doors open.
I got that on camera.
Good.
Right, and we could hear you guys outside, and you're right, there was no way that room was to capacity, not even remotely.
No.
Well, I kept hearing, and I kept thinking, well, they must be trying to get in, so I walked to the very back of the room, and I got there just in time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, we looked up on Hilton's website because we're at the Hilton Hotel.
Yeah.
This room, the capacity for that room was 2,200. And we counted them up. They had put out 208 chairs.
Right.
That sounds about right.
A tenth of capacity. And the chairs were not yet full by the time that all the activists came in. So there was a physical struggle at the door.
That's right.
one man in particular was trying to like push me out of the way. I was holding doors open. I was ushering people in. We got nearly all of them in. But they still continued to put the brakes on people coming in because of no credentials. I had a couple of other friends who came to the door who didn't know what had happened, and they were turned away. So there were people who showed up and who paid parking and got up extra early on Thursday morning. It was crazy. So then, as the meeting started, as the doors were opening and closed, we started hearing people saying, "Let us in, let us in."
Yeah.
So I went to the back of the room, pushed open the door, and there was another physical fight. This is interrupting the meeting.
Which is great.
Yeah. So, and the protesters outside were screaming bloody murder just to like get the attention. So most of the women that were trying to get in were older women who had been unable to push their way through the door beforehand. So I was able to like scoop one of them in, but there were still about 12 that I couldn't get in. And there were about like 6 or 7 security people around me and on me. And there was probably only 6 or 7 of us trying to struggle with the door open. So then I walked up to the front of the committee rules people and interrupted and was like, "Hey, we need to get these doors open. Like, people are screaming to get let in. This is undemocratic." I had a different DNC member come help me out. And she said something like, "You're not going to get through this meeting unless you open those doors. Like, you will continue to see interruptions."
Yeah, that's right.
So
they finally let you all in.
So
right?
they finally, there was some lies. There was some like, "Oh, we would love to have them in. You know, we just want to like do it. It's a security issue, blah, blah, blah." So I was going back and forth, like walking to the doors. "Oh, can everybody be let in?" "No." "Okay." Walked back in front of them. But they finally opened the doors. And what we were there to witness and why we were so passionate about getting in that room is because there was a resolution to change the DNC rules and allow the presidential candidates to have a climate debate.
So let's talk about that for a moment, because a lot of people listening to this aren't going to understand why that's important. And you use the word allow, and I think that's really the right word to use here, allow. Right now, the way the DNC rules are, they might be penalized if they do this. So talk with me a little bit about that.
Sure. So all of the presidential candidates want a climate debate. The people want it. They know it's what we need. But currently, the DNC does not allow 2 or more presidential candidates on a network like disagreeing to put forth climate policy. They allow conversations, they allow forums, they allow town halls, but these are like weak ways to talk about ideas. We don't see anybody pushing each other. We don't see concrete policy, and debates really raise the level of awareness on an issue, and people pay attention.
So this is important, and this is why there was a good chunk of that meeting, I want to say 20 or 30 minutes, was devoted to actually defining what the word debate meant.
Yeah.
And Dr. Zogby brought up this idea of this 2 or more and why it was problematic. And I think people listening to that live stream were probably a little bit confused by that. And it probably sounded silly to them. Like, what? Yeah. How is this even a conversation? Worthy of 30 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, continue. Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure.
No, you're totally correct. We see that, like in the previous debate, people have said things, and then when they try to like wiggle out of it, for instance, Kamala Harris said that she supported Medicare for all, and then the day later she actually went back on that. It creates this precedent where if it's like, if you say it up there, we're going to hold you to it. Yeah. And there's a lot of question marks on like, what do people stand for? Do they support a Green New Deal? What do they define as a Green New Deal? How do they want to attack climate change? And the voters and the world really needs to know this information, because this is the most important underlying survival issue
Yeah.
of our time. And if we don't get this right, like we won't have time to debate immigration, voting rights,
Right.
etc.
So there were several folks in the resolutions committee that were making the case, which I thought this was really disingenuous, that they couldn't do a climate change debate simply because it would mean that other issues were being backtabled. And I think that's ridiculous. I think we are all capable of caring about more than one issue at the same time.
Yeah.
And beyond that, climate has never been front and center of the Democrats. So for them to keep, yes, but they've been saying this, all day, and all today we heard again in the general session, they were talking about how the Democratic Party is the front runner on the climate issue. And I'm like, no, you're not. The problem is there really is no leadership on the climate issue. Neither party is
Owning
working
it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's right. So they're saying, why aren't you guys yelling at the GOP? Well, because the GOP is they're climate deniers. They're never going to take up this mantle.
Yeah.
But you folks pretend that you have already,
Right.
and you have not.
Right. I would argue that the Democrats have a more dangerous position because they acknowledge that climate change is real, but they are not acting on it.
Mhm.
So in essence, you're acknowledging the threat and saying
Yeah.
it's not worth our time to fix it because it will disrupt our profits.
That's and that's exactly what's at base here. And I think it's important to point out that several of those members that were arguing against this are lobbyists.
Yes.
So they do have a vested interest.
And
And this is something that the DNC needs to deal with. It's been a continual problem
Yeah.
now for quite some time.
Yeah, and the way that DNC members, many DNC members are elected, but many of them are appointed. So when you have appointed members who Tom Perez picks and appoints, they don't have a constituency. They don't have a base that they have to go home to and answer to. They only answer to Tom Perez.
And their corporate donors.
And their corporate donors. Exactly. Exactly. So we have a huge problem with the Democratic Party being essentially defenders of capitalism and defenders of corporate profits. And they don't want to talk about climate change because it is so dire. We need to transform the economy in a way that will cut off mass amounts of donors and dollars.
100%. I mean, the Amazon forest is absolutely, literally on fire right now. This is
Yeah.
not a figurative thing. It is literally on fire.
Yeah.
And
I have to say, with the Amazon forest, that specifically reflects back on Washington and the CIA because the CIA has helped Bolsonaro
100%.
rise to power, and we would not be seeing the rise in fascism across the globe, and specifically in Brazil, had the CIA not intervened with
And
that.
that goes back to the same corporate interests because they're absolutely protecting business interests abroad, and a lot of that land is being eliminated for cattle grazing and for growing grain, which feeds the cattle grazing, and all that beef comes back into the United States.
Right. It definitely doesn't hurt to acknowledge like your own carbon footprint, but 71% of all carbon emissions are from like a handful of the top corporations. So even if the whole United States stopped eating beef, we would still see these corporations
100%, we have
continue
to
admit. Yeah. That is the main issue.
All right, so there were two resolutions that they were looking at that pertain to climate change. So the first one got completely shot down, wasn't even up for debate.
And that was the climate debate.
So
Whether
that
or
was
not
the
to have the
question,
climate
So
debate.
they pushed on that a little bit. Jim made a great speech, I think, Jim Zogby did, but that just got shot down. So there was still hope on the second one, and after some bantering that went on for a good 2 hours, I would say, they came to a resolution that was weaker than what you folks were asking for.
Yes.
But it was still sort of a compromise enough where everybody was willing to take it. But before we move on to what happened today, this morning with that, which was really a tragedy, I think part of what drove that decision for the compromise to happen was the fact that you guys were finally in that room.
Yes.
And you
Watching them.
You took over the space. You stood on the chairs. You started singing and chanting. And in that moment, all the press was now like averted to you folks and not any of the committee members.
Right.
And there was literally absolutely nothing they could do. They were powerless.
No.
Which I thought was great.
there were hundreds of us, so we really got to set the agenda. And the resolution that we wanted was Resolution 5, which was voted down. But because we were there, they amended Resolution 4 to allow for presidential candidates to engage in public forums or debates on climate change, which was, the wording wasn't as strong and it didn't have as much teeth, and it was more of like a gesture.
Yeah.
But because we were there, they wanted to appease us.
Absolutely.
So they
But
changed
at
the
the very least, they understood
language.
the optics were getting to be very bad.
Oh
You
yeah,
know?
definitely. So they passed, like, let's be clear, the Resolutions Committee with all of the DNC appointees passed Resolution 4. They amended it and they passed it. That resolution, along with all the other resolutions that they passed, were basically in a package that the members today, all of the members today, were going to vote on.
Correct. So this morning let's talk about that. So this morning we come to the general session, and that's when all of the work that the committees did all week gets approved by the membership itself in the general session. So the Resolutions Committee sends forth their packet, and this was in the packet. Now all of a sudden this morning, Tom Perez doesn't want this.
Yeah.
And now they're taking motions to overturn this and just get rid of it. And I actually was really angry at Tom Perez when he opened his mouth and said how he was voting. Yeah. Which was to get rid of the resolution.
Which was signaling.
It was
every
signaling.
other
It absolutely
person
was signaling.
that they
It was
needed
totally
to follow
inappropriate of him.
his
That
lead.
was him overstepping his line. He should have remained neutral.
Yeah.
He chose not to.
No. So he made it a point to single out Resolution 4 and did a motion or whatever to pull it out of the resolutions packet.
Right.
So he forced a scene today to make sure he not only defeated it he didn't just defeat it quietly. He made a scene as well.
I agree.
Yeah. So there were maybe a little over 400 members who got to cast their vote today, and we lost that vote. So even though the Resolutions Committee passed Resolution 4 with the amendment, because of Tom Perez's leadership, he was able to squish that to the dismay of every young person in the world.